My wife came out as a lesbian after a decade together, and everything changed. I never imagined I'd be writing something like this. For 10 years, I thought I knew exactly how my life was going to unfold. I had a wife I loved, a stable routine, long-term plans, and a future that felt predictable in a comforting way. Then, one quiet conversation dismantled everything I thought I understood, not just about my marriage, but about myself. We met in our early 20s. It was one of those relationships that started slowly and then suddenly became serious without either of us noticing the exact moment it crossed that line. She was kind, thoughtful, and funny in a subtle way. I loved how deeply she cared about people and how easily she made a house feel like a home. We dated for 4 years before getting married. There were no dramatic red flags, no constant fighting, no obvious cracks. Like most couples, we had disagreements, but nothing that felt unmanageable. We supported each other through job changes, family issues, financial stress, and all the ordinary chaos of adulthood. If you'd asked me back then whether I thought we were happy, I would have said yes without hesitation. Looking back now, I can see things I didn't recognize at the time. Our intimacy slowly faded, but I assumed it was stress, routine, or just how long-term relationships evolved. She became more withdrawn emotionally, more quiet about her own needs. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, she'd say she was just tired or overwhelmed. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The night everything changed didn't look dramatic from the outside. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. No argument, no tension. She asked if we could talk. I thought it was going to be about work or family, something normal. Instead, she took a long breath and said, "I need to tell you something, and I'm scared it's going to hurt you." That sentence alone made my stomach drop. She told me she'd been in therapy for months, trying to understand why she felt disconnected from herself. And through that process, she'd come to a realization she could no longer ignore. She told me she was a lesbian. For a moment, I honestly didn't understand what she was saying. My brain latched onto the word but couldn't place it in the context of my life. I remember asking something stupid like, "What do you mean?" as if there were multiple interpretations. She explained that she'd grown up in an environment where being anything other than straight wasn't even an option. She'd convinced herself that what she felt for women was admiration, or curiosity, or something she could suppress. Marrying me felt safe. It felt like what she was supposed to do. She told me she cared about me deeply, that I was her best friend, that none of this was my fault. And somehow, that hurt more than if she'd just said she didn't love me anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, numb, trying to process the fact that my marriage hadn't failed in the way I'd always imagined marriages failed. There was no betrayal, no affair, no deception in the malicious sense. Just a truth that had been buried for too long. The days after that conversation were surreal. We moved around each other carefully, like roommates who didn't know the rules anymore. We talked endlessly about the past, about what this meant, about whether there was any version of our marriage that could survive. There wasn't. She wasn't asking to experiment or take a break. She wasn't confused anymore. She was certain. And as much as it hurt, I respected that honesty. I didn't want to be married to someone who had to deny who they were just to stay with me. Still, knowing that didn't make the loss easier. Telling our families was another level of pain. Some people were supportive. Others were confused. A few treated me like I'd been tricked, like I was a victim of some elaborate lie. I didn't see it that way. I saw two people who did the best they could with the understanding they had at the time. The divorce itself was surprisingly calm. No fighting over money, no legal warfare. We divided things fairly. We mourned the life we thought we'd have together. On the day she moved out, we hugged for a long time. I cried harder than I had since the day my father died. After she left, the silence in the house was unbearable. For months, I felt like I was floating through my own life. I went to work, came home, ate whatever required the least effort, and went to sleep. Friends tried to be supportive, but it was hard to explain grief that didn't come with anger. There was nothing to rage against, just absence. Therapy saved me. At first, I went because I didn't know what else to do. I needed somewhere to put all the questions that had no answers. Why hadn't I seen it? Was any of it real? Did she ever truly love me? Slowly, therapy shifted from survival to self-examination. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't defining myself as someone's partner. I had to confront who I was without the structure of marriage. And that's when things began to change in ways I didn't expect. I realized how much of myself I'd put on hold to be a good husband. I'd stayed in a career that drained me because it was stable. I'd avoided risks because I valued predictability. I'd prioritized being needed over being fulfilled. With nothing left to protect, I started asking uncomfortable questions. I changed jobs, took a role I'd always been interested in but never thought I was allowed to pursue. It paid less at first, but I felt alive again. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with. I started exercising, not to impress anyone, but because it helped quiet my mind. I learned how to be alone without being lonely. About a year after the divorce, I started dating again. Not seriously at first. I was honest about my past and my baggage. I was surprised by how many people responded with empathy instead of judgment. Eventually, I met someone who felt like a completely different chapter, not a replacement, not a comparison, just something new. Being with her didn't erase my past, but it didn't compete with it either. It existed alongside it. As for my ex-wife, she's doing well. She's living openly now, something she never got to do before. We don't talk often, but when we do, it's with mutual respect and gratitude for what we shared, even if it couldn't last forever. It's strange to say this, but losing my marriage forced me to find myself. The pain cracked something open that had been sealed shut for years. I wouldn't wish that heartbreak on anyone, but I can't deny what grew in its place. If you had told me 10 years ago that my wife coming out would lead to the most profound growth of my life, I would have laughed or panicked. But here I am. Not bitter, not broken, just changed. Sometimes the end of the life you planned is the beginning of the life you actually need.